Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. The Arizona desert in August is no place to be careless, and at 31, I really thought I knew better. I'd lived in Phoenix for about 3 years as a freelance photographer, so the outdoors had become my second home. Every weekend, I explored new trails with my camera, building up my portfolio of southwestern landscapes. When I found the Desert Wanderers group on Facebook, it seemed ideal. They organized hikes to remote spots most tourists never saw, with people who were truly experienced. That Saturday, I packed my gear, what I thought was plenty of water's 3 liters, my camera equipment, protein bars, sunscreen, and a light jacket. Frank, the group leader, a weathered veteran who'd hiked these trails for decades, stressed the need for extra water. I dismissed it, figuring 3 liters would be more than enough for a 5-hour trek. We met at a gas station off Highway 60 at 5:00 a.m., trying to avoid the worst of the heat. There were 8 of us, a mix of seasoned and intermediate hikers like me. Frank reviewed the route of mile loop through a canyon, passing ancient petroglyphs and natural springs. He checked everyone's water supply, nodding at most, but his eyebrow went up at mine. 3 liters might be cutting it close, he warned, his voice gritty from years of desert air. The gas station was closed and I assured him I'd be fine, convinced my previous desert hikes qualified me. The first hour was magic. The sunrise painted the rocks in impossible shades of orange and pink. Hues my camera struggled to capture, though I tried with every shot. The group kept a good pace, but I kept stopping to photograph the light hitting the canyon walls, the intricate sand patterns, and the solitary barrel cacti standing like sentinels. Around 7:30, we hit a narrow section where huge boulders cast incredible shadow patterns over the red dirt. I had to get the shot. The contrast was perfect. I told the person nearest me, Diane, a nurse from Scottsdale, that I'd catch up in a minute. She nodded and walked on, her bright blue pack disappearing around a bend as I crouched down to adjust my settings. Through my viewfinder, I noticed a side trail leading up to what looked like a natural arch about 50 yards away. The morning light was hitting it perfectly, creating a golden glow that would only last for another 20 minutes. Without a second thought, I scrambled up the rocky path, boots sliding on the loose gravel, determined to get that perfect portfolio shot. The arch was even more spectacular up close. I spent maybe 15 minutes shooting from various angles, completely lost in my work. When I finally lowered my camera and looked around, the silence hit me first. No voices, no footsteps. The main trail below was empty. A sharp spike of annoyance shot through me. The group hadn't waited. I hurried back down to the main trail and turned right, the direction we'd been headed. After 10 minutes of fast walking, I still hadn't caught up. The trail then split near a cluster of tall saguaros and I stopped, sweat beading on my forehead despite the early hour. I tried to recall if Frank had mentioned a fork. My phone had no signal, only a useless, emergency calls only message. I hadn't downloaded offline maps because I was supposed to be with the group. I chose the left path, reasoning it looked more worn, suggesting heavier traffic, the main route. But after another 20 minutes of rapid hiking, the path narrowed and started climbing steeply, nothing like the relatively flat loop Frank had described. My first water bottle was already half empty. I'd been sipping constantly in my rush. The temperature was soaring. My phone's weather app, one of the few things that worked offline, showed it was already 92 degrees Fahrenheit, and it wasn't even 900 a.m. I wasted another 20 minutes and more precious water backtracking to the fork, then tried the right path. This one seemed better at first, winding through a wash with high walls that offered some shade. But after about a mile, it ended at a pile of massive boulders, likely fallen during a recent flash flood. The rational part of my brain screamed, "Stay calm. Retrace your steps to where you took the photos, and wait for the group to realize you're gone." But pride and a growing kernel of panic pushed me to keep searching. I climbed a small ridge for a better view, hoping to spot the group or a recognizable landmark. All I saw was endless desert in every direction, miles of creosote bushes, ocotillo plants with their spindly arms reaching for the cloudless sky, and distant mountains shimmering in the heat that was already distorting the air. My second water bottle was down to a third. My phone read 947 and 101 degree F. My camera gear, usually light, felt like stones in my pack. My shirt was soaked through with sweat that evaporated instantly in the dry air. By 1100 a.m. I'd finished my second bottle and was halfway through my third and last. The temperature was 109 GGF. Every breath felt like inhaling from a blow dryer. I gave up on the trail and focused on survival, finding any shade. But the sun was nearly overhead, and the scraggly desert plants cast shadows barely bigger than dinner plates. My lips were cracked, and I could feel a severe sunburn starting on the back of my neck. In the distance, about 2 miles away, I spotted power lines cutting across the desert. Power lines meant access roads, which meant potential help. But 2 miles in this heat, with almost no water, felt like crossing an ocean. I found a large boulder with a slight overhang and squeezed into the narrow strip of shade, pulling my knees to my chest to make myself as small as possible. That's when the real fear set in. I knew the statistics. People die here every summer. The heat kills slowly: confusion, then hallucinations, then organ failure. I rationed my last water bottle into tiny sips, just enough to wet my mouth, and tried to calculate how long I could last. My phone was at 40% battery, still no signal, and I'd turned off everything but emergency services. I took off my long-sleeved hiking shirt and wrapped it around my head like a makeshift turban, sitting there in just my sports bra, survival trumping modesty. The rocks radiated heat like an oven, and I could see the air shimmering, creating weird mirages of distant bushes like pools of water. Around 100 p.m., with the temperature at 120 BPF, I decided to go for the power lines. Staying put meant certain dehydration, and nobody knew exactly where I was. I tore pages from my photography notebook, weighed them down with rocks, and drew arrows pointing in the direction I was heading, just in case. My water was down to maybe 3 ounces. I decided to drink it all before starting the walk rather than torture myself with the sloshing sound. The ground burned through my hiking boots, and within 5 minutes of leaving the boulder, the sun felt like thousands of tiny needles attacking my exposed skin. I draped my jacket over my head and shoulders, a pathetic tent of shade that did almost nothing. The 2 miles felt like 20. Every few hundred yards I had to stop and rest, crouching down as my heart hammered in my ears. My mouth was dry, my tongue swollen and heavy. Random thoughts flashed in my head, memories of ice cream, swimming pools, that spa shower from my birthday. About halfway to the power lines, I stumbled and fell, my palms scraping against the burning rocks. For a moment I just lay there, wondering if this was the end. But then I heard the distant hum of electricity, and even better, the faint sound of an engine. I forced myself up, legs shaking, and stumbled forward, waving my white jacket like a flag, screaming with the last of my voice. Though it came out as a weak croak. It was a utility truck, one of those white pickups with yellow flashing lights, driving slowly along the access road. The driver, a man named Carl, about 50 with tanned, tattooed arms, later told me he almost didn't stop because he thought I was a mirage. But my desperate stumbling and waving jacket made him hit the brakes. He jumped out, already reaching for his water cooler. I'll never forget the feeling of that first gulp of cold water. It was like coming back to life, like every screaming cell in my body suddenly went quiet. He poured some over my head and neck, not caring that he was soaking the seats, and helped me into his air-conditioned cab. The thermometer on his dash read 114 GF outside. He told me I was incredibly lucky. He wasn't supposed to be in this section until next week but was checking on reports of copper thieves. Carl drove me straight to the nearest urgent care, calling ahead to report a case of heat exhaustion. Nurses hooked me up to IV fluids, and I spent the next 4 hours with cooling blankets, my core temperature slowly dropping while they monitored my kidney function. Frank and the hiking group had realized I was missing when they reached the lunch spot and had already called search and rescue by the time Carr found me. The doctor, a young woman specialized in desert-related injuries, told me flatly that another hour or two in that heat without water could have meant organ failure. I still have the pale scars on my palms from where I fell, little reminders that fade a bit more each year. I still photograph the desert, but I never hike alone now. I carry a minimum of 6 liters of water, and I bought a GPS beacon that sends my location to satellites every 10 minutes. That WELF 12 device might seem like overkill to some, but they didn't spend 3 hours thinking they were going to die alone in the Arizona desert, watching their bodies slowly shut down as the power lines shimmered in the heat. Most people assume Montana in October is too cold for backpacking, but that never stopped me from chasing those empty trails after the crowds had gone home. At 32, after 6 years guiding tours in Yellowstone, solitude had become my personal obsession. The day everything went wrong started like any other fall trip, just me, my welt-worn Osprey pack, and 40 miles of wilderness separating me from the nearest paved road. The Absaroka, Bartooth Wilderness lay stretched out like a silent tomb of pine and granite, deserted save for the animals preparing for winter. My plan felt perfect: a 3-day hike up Slow Creek to the plateau, a chance to photograph the fall colors, and maybe spot some elk before the heavy snows hit. The ranger in Cook City had warned me about increased grizzly activity near the berry patches, but after years of carrying bear spray and never needing it, those warnings had become mere background noise. The spot where it all unraveled was about 11 miles from the trailhead, nestled between 2 ridges where the creek curved through a perfect meadow. Setting up camp took longer than usual because the ground was already starting to freeze, making it nearly impossible to drive my tent stakes deep enough to anchor against the wind. By the time my small orange shelter was ready, darkness had completely swallowed the valley, leaving only the circle of my headlamp dancing across the frost-covered grass. Dinner was lukewarm instant ramen eaten straight from the pot on a fallen log, watching the stars emerge in that crystal-clear mountain sky. The temperature had already dropped below 20 degrees Fahrenheit, and every breath created little dissolving clouds of vapor. After hanging my food bag on the bare pole 100 yards from camp, a standard, automatic procedure, exhaustion pulled me into my sleeping bag around 8:30 p.m. early, but typical for solo trips when there's nothing to do after dark. The breathing woke me up around 200 a.m., a deep, rhythmic huffing that made the tent walls vibrate with each exhale. My first thought was immediately grisly, that distinct sound of a massive predator investigating something new in its territory. Through the thin nylon, maybe 3 feet from my head, came the unmistakable noise of a huge animal shifting its weight from paw to paw. My bear spray was right beside my sleeping bag, exactly where training taught me to keep it, and my fingers instantly found the safety tab as I tried to control my own breathing. Every course I'd ever taken screamed the same advice: stay quiet. Don't move. Let the bear lose interest and wander away. Bears investigating tents usually just satisfy their curiosity before moving on to find actual food. But this one started circling, and each footfall sent vibrations through the frozen ground that I could feel in my chest. Then came the pawing, gentle at first, like a dog scratching at a door, testing the strange orange fabric that had appeared in its space. The tent pole near my feet bent inward as the animal leaned against it, and I could hear claws snatching the rain flea, creating tiny ripping sounds that made my teeth clench. My headlamp was within reach, but turning it on would only confirm my presence inside what probably looked like a giant, exotic fruit. The circling continued, methodical and patient, occasionally punctuated by low grunts that sounded almost conversational, like the bear was talking to itself. When it pressed its nose against the tent wall near my torso, leaving a wet mark gleaming in the faint starlight, every instinct screamed at me to run. But running meant unzipping the tent, taking precious seconds, and stepping directly into the path of an animal that could cover 30 yards faster than I could blink. The crucial moment arrived when the bear hooked its claws through the mesh window by the door and pulled, tearing a 6-inch gash that let in a rush of freezing air along with the overwhelming, unforgettable smell of wet fur and rotting meat. That stench, a mix of dog kennel compost and something anciently wild, triggered every alarm bell in my brain. My thumb pressed down on the bear spray trigger, but nothing happened. The safety tab was off, but the mechanism had frozen solid in the sub-zero temperature, leaving me holding a useless canister while staring at a massive brown snout pushing through the tier. Panic finally defeated training. My body moved before my brain could stop it. Rolling sideways, I grabbed my flashlight and dove for the back of the tent, using my shoulder as a battering ram to burst through the fabric opposite the bear. The cold hit me like ice water, but adrenaline kept my legs pumping as I sprinted blindly into the darkness, with only the bouncing beam of my light showing glimpses of trees and rocks. Behind me, the sound of the tent being demolished, poles snapping, fabric shredding, my entire camp destroyed in seconds. The bear's roar echoed off the canyon walls, not the comical sound you hear in movies, but a primal force that seemed to come from the earth itself. My bare feet, no time for boots, found every sharp rock and frozen stick as I crashed through the underbrush, following the creek downstream, hoping the water would offer a clearer path and maybe mask my scent. My flashlight beam caught the reflection of eyes behind me, definitely following, maybe 40 yards back, moving with that deceptive, casual pace grizzlies use when they aren't trying yet. Blood from my torn feet left a perfect trail in the fresh snow that had started falling earlier. The creek led to a narrow ravine where the walls pressed in so close I could touch both sides. Scrambling over ice-covered boulders, I heard the bear's breathing getting closer, no longer casual, but purposeful. About 50 yards into the ravine, I saw what looked like salvation, a cluster of massive boulders creating a gap maybe 2 feet wide. Too small for a full-grown grizzly, but just wide enough for a desperate human. Wedging myself into that crack meant scraping skin off my shoulders and back, but it put solid granite between me and those claws. The bear arrived seconds later, ramming its shoulder against the opening hard enough to shake dust from the rocks above. Its frustration was clear in the deep growls that shook my hiding spot. For the next 4 hours, until the first gray light of dawn started creeping across the sky, that bear tried everything to reach me. It dug at the base of the rocks, sending showers of gravel into my face. It climbed on top and reached down with paws the size of dinner plates, claws scraping mere inches from my head. At one point, it left for maybe 20 minutes, the longest 20 minutes of my life, before returning to resume the siege. The cold had moved beyond painful into a strange numbness where I couldn't feel my feet anymore, and violent shivering made it hard to hold the flashlight steady. Hypothermia whispered seductively about how easy it would be to just close my eyes and sleep, but the occasional swipe of claws kept snapping me back to alertness. Around 5:00 a.m., with visibility slowly improving, the bear seemed to lose interest. Its sounds grew distant until they faded entirely. Still, I waited another hour before painfully crawling out of that crack, every joint screaming in protest after being locked in the same position for so long. The journey back to what was left of my camp took 3 hours on destroyed feet that had turned purple and black from frostbite. Every step felt like walking on broken glass, leaving bloody prints in the fresh snow that now covered the night's chaos. The campsite looked like a bomb had exploded. Sleeping bags were shredded and scattered over 50 yards. Tent poles were bent into impossible angles. My backpack was torn open, freeze-dried meals and clothing strewn everywhere. The bear had even found and chewed my water filter into plastic confetti. But my satellite emergency beacon, tucked in a side pocket the bear had missed, still worked. Pressing that SOS button felt like admitting defeat after years of priding myself on wilderness self-sufficiency. But pride means nothing when you're looking at toes that might need amputation. While waiting for rescue, I gathered what gear I could, stuffing torn clothing against my feet to stop the bleeding. That's when I discovered something that made my chest tighten, massive paw prints circling the entire meadow, showing the bear had stalked my camp for hours before I woke up. The helicopter arrived just after noon. The search and rescue team's faces shifted from professional calm to genuine concern when they saw the condition of my feet and the devastation around us. During the flight to the hospital in Billings, the paramedic cleaning my wounds mentioned they'd been tracking an aggressive male grizzly in the area, one that had lost its fear of humans after too many encounters with careless campers who didn't secure their food. The irony was not lost on me. I'd done everything right, followed every protocol, and still ended up as a statistic. The doctor at the hospital counted 43 separate lacerations on my feet and confirmed 2 toes would need partial amputation due to frostbite. Recovery took 2 months of physical therapy and skin grafts, but the mental recovery has stretched much longer. Even now, 5 years later, sleeping in a tent triggers nightmares where I wake up gasping, convinced I can hear that distinctive breathing just outside. The investigation that followed revealed details that still sicken me. Rangers found the bear's day beds less than 200 yards from where I'd camped, meaning it had watched me set up, cook dinner, and crawl into my tent like I was putting myself into a wrapped gift box. Tracks showed it had approached and retreated at least 4 times before finally committing to the investigation that woke me up. They eventually had to put the bear down 3 weeks later, after it charged a group of hunters near Cook City. The necropsy revealed something disturbing. Its stomach contained human clothing and gear from at least 2 other camps, though no bodies were ever found. The biologist explained that the bear had learned to associate human camps with easy food rewards, likely from years of raiding improperly stored supplies, and had begun seeing tents themselves as food containers to be opened. What saved me? apparently, was pure luck. The ravine I'd stumbled into while running blind was the only geographical feature for miles that could have provided adequate protection from a determined grizzly. These days, I still guide tours through Yellowstone, but something fundamental has changed in how I move through wild spaces. Every snapping twig makes me pause. Every shadow holds potential danger, and I carry 2 cans of bear spray plus a backup that I keep at body temperature to prevent freezing. When clients ask about my pronounced limp, or why I wear special boots to accommodate my modified feet, I tell them the story. I watch their faces shift from excitement about spotting wildlife to understanding the reality of sharing space with apex predators. The wilderness isn't malicious or evil. That bear was just being a bear, following instincts honed over thousands of years. But it's not our friend either. It's not some movie where respect and proper food storage guarantee safety. Sometimes you do everything right and still end up bleeding in the snow, wedged between rocks, while 700 pounds of muscle and claws tries to drag you out. That's the truth they don't put in the camping guides. Nature doesn't care about your training, your experience, or your gear. When you step into those mountains, you're accepting that contract, walking into something beautiful and terrible that might just decide to remind you where you really stand on the food chain. Finals were crushing me that November, so when my roommate Jason suggested we ditch Friday classes for a hiking trip in the Cascades Foothills, I immediately agreed. At 22, stressed out and needing a break more than a European history lecture, I was desperate to clear my head. We loaded his battered Ford Ranger with camping gear we had no intention of using, grabbed a few energy bars and bottled water from the campus store, and took off at dawn. The drive was 3 hours north, past small logging towns with wood-paneled diners and 2 pump gas stations. Jason blasted the same indie rock playlist he'd loved since sophomore year, while I watched the city fade into a sea of Douglas firs and mountain ash. The parking area was just a wide gravel turnout, big enough for 4 or 5 cars. Ours was the only one there when we arrived around 9 a.m. The trail started behind a weathered wooden sign that barely showed the words, Ridgeline Trail Phase 7. Jason grabbed his backpack while I tightened my boot laces and pulled on the fleece jacket my mom had sent. The path was narrow, covered in slippery, bronze pine needles from recent rain. It switched back through trees so thick that even though the sun was out, the canopy kept everything dim and cold. We'd been walking for maybe 40 minutes, Jason recounting a girl in his economics class who kept texting him at 200 a.m. when we rounded a cluster moss-covered boulders and saw something white fluttering against a huge cedar tree about 20 feet ahead. I initially thought it was trash, but as we got closer, I saw it was a paper mask, one of those cheap dollar store Halloween ones, pinned to the bark with what looked like a hunting knife. The mask had crudely cut out eye holes and a creepy smile drawn on with black marker. Stabbed through by the same knife was a folded piece of notebook paper. Before I could warn him not to touch it, Jason reached for the note, pulling the paper free while the knife stayed in the tree. We both leaned in to read the message, written in the same black marker. Welcome to the game. Take the mask and find the next one. 50 paces north where the fallen oak makes a bridge. Your time starts now. Jason actually laughed, that nervous chuckle he used when pretending not to be scared during horror movies, and suggested it was a geocaching challenge or a college scavenger hunt. His competitive side, which made him insufferable during board games, immediately took over. Before I could say we should just leave, he'd yanked the knife out, grabbed the mask, and started counting paces north. I followed, because what else was I going to do? Leave him alone out there. But something about the setup made my chest feel tight, a feeling that had nothing to do with hiking or altitude. Sure enough, 50 paces through the underbrush led us to a massive oak tree whose trunk spanned a small ravine like a natural bridge. On the other side, tied to a branch with orange surveyor's tape, was another paper mask. This one had triangular eyes and a frown drawn in red ink. The note attached read, "Good job. You're learning fast. Next mask is at the clearing where 3 trails meet. Follow the deer path behind the big stump." Jason was fully invested now, stowing the first mask, grabbing the second, and talking about how elaborate this was, and what the prize might be. But as I scanned the woods, trying to find the deer path, I noticed something that made every muscle in my body go rigid. About 30 yards to our left, partly hidden behind a clump of young hemlocks, someone in camouflage gear was standing perfectly still, watching us. I grabbed Jason's arm so hard he nearly dropped the mask. When he started to complain, I just pointed with my chin. The figure didn't move. No wave, no greeting, none of the normal things a person on a trail does when spotted. They just stood there like a statue, wearing full hunting camo, including one of those face masks that covers everything except the eyes. Jason whispered that it was probably just a hunter, maybe bow season. But hunters don't stand there staring. And this person wasn't carrying a visible weapon, just standing with their arms at their sides in a completely unnatural pose. We stood there for maybe 10 or 15 seconds before Jason loudly called out, "Hey there," and waved. The figure didn't respond. That's when I noticed the smell. A thick, metallic scent that cut through the normal smells of dirt and rotting leaves. I realized it was coming from somewhere past the fallen oak, from the direction the game wanted us to go. Jason must have smelled it too, because his cocky attitude drained away as he took a step back, nearly slipping on the wet leaves. The figure in camo finally moved then, not toward us, but parallel to our position, walking through the trees with slow, deliberate steps that somehow made almost no sound on the underbrush. They stopped again, maybe 20 yards away, still watching. And that's when we saw the second person, dressed the same way, standing on the opposite side of the trail we'd come from, effectively boxing us in. Jason grabbed my shoulder and hissed that we needed to get back to the truck right now. Forget the stupid game. We turned to head back the way we came, trying to walk fast without actually running, but as we passed the cedar tree where we'd found the first mask, we saw a third figure in camouflage standing directly on the trail ahead of us, holding something that looked like another paper mask. We immediately veered off the trail, crashing through sallow bushes and devil's club that tore at our clothes and skin, both of us abandoning any pretense of staying calm. Jason dropped his backpack somewhere in those first panicked minutes. I could hear him gasping ragged breaths that matched my own as we stumbled over roots and ducked under low branches. The worst part was the silence behind us. No shouting, no sounds of pursuit, just our own panicked flight, while those figures were probably moving through the woods like smoke, knowing exactly where we were going. The truck was our only thought. Get to the truck, lock the doors, drive until we hit pavement, cell service, and normal people. We burst out of the tree line into the small parking area after what felt like hours, but was probably 20 minutes of pure adrenaline-fueled running. The Ford Ranger sat exactly where we'd left it. Jason fumbled for his keys, his hands trembling so badly he dropped them twice in the gravel. But when we got within 10 feet of the truck, we both froze. The ground around it was covered in footprints, dozens and dozens of boot prints in the soft dirt, circling the vehicle over and over again. They went around at least 7 or 8 times, and in some spots, the impressions were deeper, as if someone had stopped and stood still, waiting, watching the trail for our return. Jason made a choked sound, nearly a sob, and practically dove for the driver's side door, jamming the key in the lock. Nothing else seemed touched, except for those prints, and one other thing tucked under the windshield wiper was another paper mask. This one had hollow black circles for eyes and no mouth at all. Written across the forehead in that same black marker were the words Z. "You didn't finish the game." Jason ripped the mask off and threw it on the ground. We both jumped in the truck and slammed the locks down. He turned the key, and for one horrible second, the engine just clicked. That dead battery sound that drains your soul. But it roared to life on the second try, and we were moving, gravel spraying everywhere as Jason reversed too fast. As we spun the truck around to face the exit, all 3 figures emerged from the forest edge at different points, standing in that same unnatural stillness, watching us leave. One of them raised a hand, not in a wave, but holding it up like they were showing us something. Even from inside the truck, I could see it was another folded piece of paper. Jason floored it down the forestry road, fishtailing on the loose gravel, while I kept looking back, expecting to see headlights. But there was nothing, just empty road and dust. We didn't slow down until we hit the main highway 40 minutes later. Even then, Jason checked the mirrors obsessively while I called 911 on my finally working phone. The sheriff's deputy who met us at a nearby gas station looked exactly like every skeptical small-town cop. Thick mustache, bored expression. I knew within a minute of telling our story that he didn't believe us. He took notes about the masks and the camouflage figures, said he'd have someone check the trail, but kept asking if we'd been drinking or taking anything, shining his flashlight in our pupils, even though it was barely afternoon. When Jason demanded they go up there immediately, the deputy just mumbled something about bow season bringing out all kinds of hunters and city kids, often misinterpreting normal forest activity. He gave us his card and suggested we go home and rest. The drive back to campus took forever. We hardly spoke, just listened to the engine and watched every car that got too close. When we finally made it to our apartment, Jason went straight to his room and didn't come out all weekend. The following Thursday, Jason finally told me he'd been researching online, finding old news articles about hikers going missing in that area, though nothing recent enough to feel connected. He showed me a blog post from 3 years earlier, where someone described finding paper masks on trees during a solo hike, but the post ended abruptly and the account was never updated. We agreed never to talk about it with anyone else after our friends started joking about us being spooked by hunters and calling us paranoid. But here's the detail that still makes me check my locks twice every night and avoid hiking altogether. About a month after that trip, right before winter break, I was walking to my car in the campus parking garage when I found something tucked under my wiper. It was a piece of notebook paper, folded exactly like the ones in the forest. Written in that same black marker was a single line: "Games don't end just because you stop playing." I moved apartments the next week, changed my phone number, and even transferred to a different school the following semester, claiming it was for a better program. That was 4 years ago, and I live in a different state now, working in an office where the biggest threat is paper cuts. But sometimes I still get this feeling that someone has been in my apartment while I was at work. Nothing stolen or moved. Just this lingering sense that someone stood in my space, breathing my air, waiting. Jason and I don't talk anymore. He dropped out that spring and, last I heard, was working construction back home. But about 6 months ago, I got an email from an address I didn't recognize with no subject line, just an attachment. Against my better judgment, I opened it. It was a photo of a tree with a paper mask pinned to it. Those same hollow eyes and missing mouth. In the blurry background, unmistakable, was the apartment building I had just moved into 3 weeks earlier. I thought about going to the police, but what could I say that wouldn't sound insane? What crime had actually been committed? So now, I just live with it, changing locks that probably don't matter, avoiding the forests I used to love, and wondering if one day I'll come home to find footprints circling my car again, or worse, finally meet whoever's been playing this game for so much longer than just that one November morning. The mountains of Colorado had been calling me for years, ever since I moved to Boulder after college. That morning in early February, I checked the weather one last time before heading out. Forecasters said a storm was moving in from the west, but it wouldn't hit until late evening. Plenty of time to summit Gray's Peak and get back down. My brother Kevin had texted me the night before, worried about me going solo again, but I'd done this road a dozen times. The key to winter mountaineering isn't just knowing the mountain, it's respecting it enough to turn back. I didn't know then, sipping my black coffee and checking my gear, that the weather models were wrong by about 6 hours. I just turned 29, and Kevin joked that I should start acting more responsibly. But the mountains were where I felt most alive. I reached the trailhead around 700 a.m. The parking lot was empty except for my truck. My dashboard read 12-day circ text F-day. But I felt ready in my layers merino wool base, insulated middle, and my trusted red shell jacket. My pack held all the essentials: extra GPS batteries, energy bars, 2 liters of water in insulated bottles, an emergency bivy headlamp, and my avalanche beacon. I even packed chemical hand warmers as backup. The first 2 miles were smooth, my crampons biting into the packed snow. I followed the summer route. The sky was that deceptive winter blue that makes you complacent, but I noticed the wind picking up earlier than expected, sending small snow devils spinning across the exposed trail sections. Around 9:30 a.m., I reached the tree line where the real climb begins. The temperature had dropped, and ice crystals formed on my beard with every exhale. My GPS showed I was making good time, about 3 miles in, with another 4 to the summit. The device was sluggish in the cold, refreshing my position slowly, but I ignored it. I'd memorized this route, knew every switchback and false summit. The ridge ahead looked pristine, untouched snow gleaming like crushed diamonds. I stopped to eat a bar and drink some water, tucking the bottles inside my jacket between sips to keep them from freezing. That's when I noticed the clouds on the western horizon dark, heavy, and moving much faster than they should have been. My weather app still showed the storm arriving around 8:00 p.m., but those clouds told a different story. By the time I reached the final approach to the summit ridge around 1100 a.m., the sky had transformed into a threatening gray, and the wind had become genuinely concerning, gusting hard enough to knock me sideways. My GPS screen flickered, then went completely black. The cold had killed it. Despite the extra batteries warming in my chest pocket, I pulled out my phone for backup, but the battery indicator showed only 15%. The cold was draining it faster than I'd ever seen. I managed to send one quick text to Kevin, almost at the summit. The message showed delivered just before the screen went dark. No GPS, no phone, and the clouds were rolling in like a wall of static, swallowing the valley below. I could maybe reach the summit in 30 minutes, but getting down would take at least 3 hours in good conditions. These wouldn't be good conditions much longer. The smart move was to turn around immediately, using the remaining visibility to get below the tree line before the storm hit. But I kept thinking about that message to Kevin, almost at the summit, and how close I actually was. Pride is a dangerous thing on a mountain. I decided to push, telling myself I'd tag the summit quickly and head straight back down. The wind was howling, probably 40 mph with stronger gusts, and the first snowflakes started hitting my goggles like needles. Within 10 minutes, those few flakes became a total whiteout. I couldn't see more than 15 feet in any direction, and the wind-driven snow had already started filling in my tracks from the ascent. The summit cairn appeared suddenly out of the white void, a pile of frozen rocks that meant nothing now, except that I'd made a potentially fatal mistake. The descent started bad and got worse fast. Without GPS, I had to rely on terrain, but in a whiteout, every snow-covered rock looks identical. I knew I needed to follow the ridge northeast for about a quarter mile before turning down the eastern face, but after 5 minutes of walking, I had no idea if I'd gone 50 feet or 500. The wind was so loud I couldn't even hear my own breathing, just a constant deafening roar. My goggles kept fogging and freezing over, forcing me to clear them every few steps. That's when I noticed my fingers weren't working quite right, the early stages of frostbite setting in despite my insulated gloves. I'd been exposed too long, moving too slowly, and my body was sacrificing the extremities to preserve core heat. Every mountaineer knows that once frostbite starts, you're on borrowed time. I made the decision to stop and dig in. The alternative was wandering blind off a cliff or into an avalanche zone. Using my ice axe, I carved a small depression on the leeward side of what felt like a large boulder. It took 3 tries to open the emergency bivy sack with my fumbling fingers, and getting inside it while wearing crampons in that wind was like trying to fold myself into an envelope during a hurricane. Once inside, I shoved the chemical hand warmers into my gloves and boots. The relief was immediate but temporary. My watch showed it was just past noon. If the storm followed the original forecast and cleared by evening, I might be okay. If it lasted through the night, the math became simpler and much worse. The survival statistics for overnight exposure at 14,000 feet in a blizzard are grim. Inside the bivy sack, with the wind screaming inches from my face, I realized search and rescue wouldn't even start looking until tomorrow at the earliest. Kevin would assume I was hunkered down for the night. Mountain rescue teams don't deploy in conditions like these anyway. My choices narrowed to 2 terrible options: stay put and hope to survive 18 to 20 hours in sub-zero temperatures, or try to descend blind through terrain that kills experienced climbers even in good weather. The eastern face had several cliff bands that required perfect visibility. Then I remembered something from an avalanche course, the instructor talking about following fall lines in whiteouts. Water and gravity never lie about which way is down. If I could find the natural drainage of the slope and follow it carefully, probing each step with my ice axe, I might be able to descend without walking off a cliff. It was still insanely risky, but it was better than blind wandering. I forced myself out of the bivy sack, the wind immediately trying to rip it from my numb hands. The hand warmers had helped enough that I could properly grip my ice axe, though I couldn't feel my toes anymore. I started probing the snow ahead, feeling for the subtle dip that would indicate the natural fall line. Each step became a ritual probe with the axe: test the snow stability, shift weight forward, repeat. Time lost all meaning in that white void. The first cliff band announced itself when my ice axe suddenly found nothing but air. I jerked back, heart hammering, and sat down hard. In clear weather, I knew the road went around this cliff to the north, maybe 200 yards. But 200 yards in a whiteout might as well be 200 miles. I started traversing left, keeping the drop on my right as my only reference point. That's when I heard it, or thought I heard it, a sound like thunder, but wrong, coming from above me. Avalanche. Training took over. I drove my ice axe deep into the snow, wrapped the leash around my wrist, dropped flat, and dug my crampons in, making myself small and anchored. The rumbling grew louder, the ground vibrating, and then the air pressure changed, that distinctive whoosh of displaced air. The avalanche hit me from the left side, not the massive wall of snow I'd feared, but the edge of the slide, powder blast and chunks of ice that slammed into me like a frozen waterfall. For maybe 10 seconds I couldn't breathe, but I held on to that axe. When it passed, I was buried up to my waist but still anchored, still alive. My pack was partially torn off, and my goggles were gone. The avalanche had done me one grim favor. It had scarred away the loose snow, revealing older, harder packed snow that showed the actual shape of the terrain. Through the still, driving snow, I could make out darker shapes, rock outcroppings, giving me reference points for the first time in hours. The rest of the descent was a blur of controlled terror and small victories. Using those exposed rocks as guides, I navigated around 2 more cliff bands. My feet had gone from numb to a sharp burning sensation, a paradoxical sign that blood flow was returning, though I knew I'd lose a few toes. Around 300 p.m., I literally stumbled into the tree line. The sudden appearance of a gnarled pine tree made me cry with relief inside my frozen face mask. The trees meant I was below 12,000 feet, out of the death zone, though still far from safe. The storm continued for another 4 hours as I picked my way down through the forest, following the drainage that I knew eventually led to the trail. By the time I reached my truck, it was dark, and my headlamp barely cut through the falling snow. The engine took 3 tries to start. My fingers were too damaged to work my phone, so I drove straight to the emergency room in Georgetown, stumbling through the doors ice, covered, with bloodshot eyes, unable to speak clearly through my swollen, frostbitten lips. The final tally, I lost 3 toes on my left foot and 2 on my right to frostbite, along with the tip of my ring finger. The doctor said I was lucky. Another hour out there, and I would have lost both feet, if not my life. Kevin drove up from Denver that night, and the look on his face, a mixture of relief and fury only a sibling can manage, is something I'll never forget. He didn't say, "I told you so," but he didn't have to. The storm lasted 36 hours, dumping 4 feet of snow and claiming the lives of 2 other climbers on different peaks that same day. The search and rescue coordinator who visited me later said they wouldn't have started looking for me until day 3. By then, they would have been looking for a body. What haunts me most isn't the pain or the permanent damage that ended my serious climbing days. It's the knowledge that every single decision I made that day was wrong, that my experience had become arrogance. And the mountain gave me a lesson I barely survived learning. I still live in Colorado, still look at those peaks every morning, but I don't climb anymore. I take easy summer hikes on well-marked trails, always with a group, always turning back at the first sign of bad weather. People ask if I miss the real mountaineering, the challenge of a winter ascent. The truth is I miss it every day. But I also remember the taste of my own mortality in that blizzard, the way my body betrayed me in the cold, and the terrible randomness of surviving when others didn't. The mountains are still beautiful, still calling. But now I know what that call really is, not an invitation, but a warning. My frostbite scars ache when the temperature drops, a permanent reminder written in damaged nerve endings and missing flesh. Some lessons you carry in your mind, others you carry in your body. This one I carry in both. Every parent assumes they're prepared for the worst until it actually happens. That Saturday in early June changed everything about how I view the wild. My accounting firm in Eugene had given me a long weekend, and I'd been leading groups into the Oregon backcountry since my college days as a guide. I knew these trails better than most people know their own neighborhoods. My son Nathan had just turned 14, and he'd been begging me to take him and his friends on a real backpacking trip, not just our usual day hikes. The boys had finished 8th grade the week before, and this was their celebration before high school. Nathan's friends, Bradley and Josh were great kids. I'd known them since elementary school, and their families trusted me enough to sign the permission slips without many questions. We chose a section of the Cascade Range I knew intimately, a moderate 15-mile loop that would challenge them but keep them safe. Bradley was the group's joker, constantly making the others laugh with impressions of their teachers. Josh was quieter, more observant, always pointing out interesting plants or asking about the ecosystem. Nathan was a mix, trying to act responsible because his dad was there, but still dissolving into giggles whenever Bradley did something absurd. The weather forecast was perfect, clear skies and temperatures in the low 70s. We made good time that morning, covering about 6 miles, but stopping for lunch near a creek crossing around noon. The boys were in high spirits, talking about summer plans, their crushes, and arguing over which video game they'd play first when we got home Sunday night. The creek was running higher than usual from the late spring melt, crystal, clear water rushing over smooth, centuries, polished granite rocks. Josh had finished his sandwich first and was crouched by the water's edge, filling his filtered bottle. Bradley was trying to balance on a fallen log that stretched halfway across the stream, and Nathan was helping me collect our lunch trash. Bradley announced he needed to refill his bottle too. All 3 boys had those fancy filtered bottles their parents insisted on, though I still made them stick to running streams just to be safe. The sound of the creek was loud, which is probably why none of us noticed exactly when Josh stood up and walked toward the trees. Bradley was still playing tightrope walker on his log, making Nathan laugh when I did a quick head count and came up 1 short. The space where Josh had been was empty, just his water bottle cap sitting on a rock. My first thought was that he'd slipped behind a tree to take a leak. I called his name, casually at first, the way parents do when they aren't truly worried yet. No answer came back, just the constant rush of water. Nathan immediately noticed the shift in my voice and started scanning the tree line, while Bradley hopped off the log and jogged over to the creek bank. The forest around us was thick with Douglas firs and hemlocks, creating a maze of shadows, but visibility was still decent for about 30 yards in most directions. The next 10 minutes shifted from mild concern to genuine worry as we spread out, calling Josh's name with increasing volume and urgency. Bradley found the first tracks about 20 feet from where Josh had been filling his bottle, clear boot prints in the soft dirt, heading back toward the main trail we'd just come from. The prints were definitely Josh's, matching the distinctive waffle pattern of his new hiking boots. We followed them together, moving quickly but carefully, expecting to find Josh around every bend, maybe sitting on a rock, checking his phone or taking pictures. But the tracks kept going, weaving between trees in an oddly purposeful way, like he was following something or someone, even though we hadn't seen another soul all morning. About 200 yards from the creek, right where the trail curved around a massive moss-covered boulder, the footprints simply stopped, as if Josh had been lifted straight up into the air. Nathan started genuinely panicking, his voice cracking as he called out again and again. Bradley kept insisting it had to be a prank, but I knew Josh wasn't that kind of kid. The way those tracks just ended made every hair on my arm stand up. I checked my phone for a signal, knowing it was unlikely. No service, not a single bar. The GPS was erratic too, showing our location jumping around erratically, sometimes miles from where we actually stood. My old compass, the one my father gave me 20 years ago, was spinning lazily in circles, the needle refusing to settle on any direction. The afternoon sun was starting to angle through the trees when I decided to search in a grid pattern, keeping Nathan and Bradley within sight at all times. Every few minutes, I blew the emergency whistle attached to my pack, 3 short bursts followed by 3 long ones, the distress signal I'd taught the boys that morning. Bradley was silent now, mechanically calling Josh's name like a broken recording. Nathan stayed close, trembling, and I kept my hand on his shoulder, trying to reassure him even though I felt anything but reassured myself. We must have covered every square foot of forest within a quarter-mile radius, checking behind logs, inside hollow cedar bases, even looking up into the canopy. Around 4:00 p.m., just as I was preparing to make the difficult decision to hike out for help, we heard it. 3 short whistles, followed by 3 long ones, exactly the pattern I demonstrated, coming from somewhere deeper in the forest. Nathan grabbed my arm, his eyes wide with a mix of hope and terror, while Bradley started shouting Josh's name until his voice cracked. The whistles came again, maybe 300 yards away, though the forest's acoustics made it impossible to pinpoint the exact direction. We crashed through the underbrush toward the sound, no longer worried about staying on the trail or making noise. But every time we thought we were getting closer, the whistles would come from a different direction. Sometimes behind us, sometimes to the left or right, always maintaining that same perfect pattern of 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. Darkness came quickly. I finally had to make the call to stop pursuing the sound and focus on our own safety. Setting up our emergency shelter, a basic tarp configuration, felt like abandoning Josh, even though he might be just beyond the next cluster of trees. Nathan was stumbling with exhaustion, and Bradley had gone completely silent, except for the occasional quiet whimper. I distributed the extra food, though no one had an appetite. The longest night of my life was measured by those whistles, which came exactly every 17 minutes according to my watch, never varying by more than a few seconds. Always that same mechanical precision that filled me with dread. Bradley finally broke around midnight, sobbing about how Josh's parents would hate him. Nathan sat pressed against my side, trembling but trying to be brave. I kept the flashlight beam sweeping across the clearing, telling myself I was looking for Josh, but really just needing to see that nothing was approaching us from the darkness. Sometime around 300 a.m., the whistle stopped mid-pattern, cutting off after just 2 short blasts. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the sounds had been, like the forest was holding its breath. First light brought intense relief. I immediately started breaking down our makeshift camp. The hike back to the trailhead took less than 2 hours, though it felt like days, with both boys practically jogging in their desperation to get back to civilization. My truck was the only vehicle there. I drove straight to the ranger station, not even stopping when Bradley threw up out the window. The rangers mobilized faster than I expected search and rescue dogs, even a helicopter that would arrive within the hour. The lead ranger, a woman named Teresa, pulled me aside after the search teams deployed and showed me something on her computer that made my whole body go numb. The trail registered data showed no other hiking permits had been issued for that section of forest in the past 4 days, and the motion-activated wildlife cameras confirmed it. Nobody else had entered or exited that area except our group. They found Josh 8 hours later, sitting calmly on a log about 50 feet from where we'd eaten lunch. His water bottle was full, his clothes clean. He had no memory of anything past kneeling by the creek to fill his bottle. The medical evaluation found nothing wrong, just a blank gap where the last 20 hours should have been. When they asked him about the whistles, he looked confused and said he didn't know the emergency signal because he'd been tying his bootless when I demonstrated it that morning, which his parents confirmed was exactly the kind of thing Josh would do. The investigation went on for 2 weeks, but they never found any explanation. Josh's parents were grateful to have him back, though I understood the unspoken message that they blamed me. Bradley and Nathan never talked about that night. Nathan started sleeping with his light on and quit the wilderness club at school that fall. The official report listed it as a case of temporary disorientation, ignoring the 20 hours Josh was missing, the malfunctioning compass and GPS, and those perfectly timed whistles. I sold all my camping gear at a yard sale that July. The truth is, I can't even drive past a forest without remembering those sounds, echoing through the trees, always exactly 17 minutes apart, always in that pattern Josh swore he never learned. 6 months later, I ran into Josh's mother at the grocery store. She pulled me aside, her voice barely a whisper, and told me something that made my knees nearly buckle. Josh had started whistling in his sleep about a month after the incident, the exact same pattern we'd heard in the woods. When she tried to wake him during these episodes, he'd sit up with his eyes wide open, but completely unfocused, continuing to whistle for exactly 17 minutes before lying back down with no memory of it. She'd taken him to specialists, but every test came back normal. They moved to California that winter. The last thing she said to me before hurrying away with her cart was that the whistling had stopped after they crossed the state line. Completely, like whatever had been causing it couldn't follow them that far. I wanted to feel relieved for them, but all I could think about was Nathan still living 3 blocks away, and whether distance really mattered to whatever we'd encountered out there in those woods.